Everyone at that table thought I was the disappointment, until the butler walked in, looked directly at me and said, "Welcome back, Miss Foster. The boardroom is prepared. They've underestimated me for years, but tonight, their illusions shattered," I thought, my heart pounding with anticipation. I sat silently at the long glass table in the rooftop dining room of the Carter Tower in downtown Savannah, where our extended family met each fall for the harvest season banquet. The panoramic skyline twinkled beyond the windows, but inside the spotlight belonged, as always, to my cousin Ethan. Polished, arrogant, and wearing a custom-tailored suit, Ethan gripped his wine like a trophy. "So," he boomed, "after my big pitch last quarter, the CEO pulled me aside and promoted me, Regional Director of Southern Sales, youngest ever." The table lit up with proud nods and congratulatory clinks of glasses. I quietly sipped herbal tea, keeping my expression neutral. "You bask in their praise, Ethan, but you're clueless about what's coming," I thought, my calm exterior masking a storm of resolve. No one at that table knew that the largest technology acquisition in the Southeast history would be finalized tomorrow morning. No one knew that I, Emily Foster, their lost potential, was the founder and CEO of Innovatech, the company acquiring Ethan's employer. "So, Emily," my Aunt Clara asked, trying to sound polite, "are you still dabbling in website design, or was it app consulting? It's hard to keep track." "You've never bothered to know me, Clara, but you'll remember my name after tomorrow," I thought, suppressing a smirk. I thought, if she only knew my dabble had just closed its Series C funding at a $120 million 0 cents valuation. "Something like that," I replied gently. Ethan leaned in, all patronizing charm. "If you're still figuring things out, I could probably find you a spot on my team at Brighton Systems, admin or entry-level analyst. You're offering me scraps from a company I'm about to own." My amusement barely concealed. "Dacian Systems. The company Innovatech would own by aita." "That's very kind," I said, nearly chuckling. My uncle grunted. "Emily, you graduated top of your class from Georgia Tech. You're 38. It's time you caught up with Ethan." "Caught up? I've surpassed you all, and you're too blind to see it," I thought, my confidence unwavering. I nodded, tracing the rim of my cup. He didn't know Forbes Southeast had just listed me in their 2026 Top 30 Innovators Reshaping the Future. And tomorrow, Ethan would walk into his office only to find my portrait in the boardroom. And the butler, standing now at the entrance, said the words that made the whole room freeze. "Miss Foster, the board is waiting for you upstairs." Brighton Systems Savannah headquarters stood tall and gleaming, its boardroom prepared for a meeting that would change everything. What Ethan didn't know was that the aimless cousin he just offered a pity job to would be seated at the head of the table as his new boss. The Forbes Southeast article had used the exact photo I'd approved, my silhouette framed against the rising sun, face turned in soft profile. Few people outside high-level investor circles had seen the founder of Innovatech in person. That was by design. I'd built my company from the shadows, and I intended to keep it that way. "Remember when we were kids?" Ethan's voice dripped with smug nostalgia, the kind that assumes a lifelong upper hand. "You always said you'd run some company one day. That was a fun little dream, huh? That dream is now your realities," Ethan thought. I thought, my eyes narrowing slightly. "Older than you know," I thought, folding my cloth napkin and placing it on my lap. Aunt Clara, ever eager with unhelpful solutions, added, "Emily, I know someone who runs a small bookstore. Maybe you could assist with orders, inventory, something flexible." "Thanks, Aunt Clara," I said with a gracious nod, gently sliding my untouched lemon tart aside. "But I'm doing all right." "All right," Ethan scoffed. "Emily, you rent a cramped flat instead of a Gaia, drive a beat-up Toyota Corolla, and what? Do contract gigs online? Meanwhile, I just closed the biggest tech deal in Brighton Systems history. Tomorrow's going to be career-defining." "You're so proud of a deal I orchestrated, Ethan," I thought, my lips twitching with irony. If only he knew. That deal he bragged about was the final phase of a quiet strategic acquisition. Innovatech had been quietly absorbing Brighton's liabilities for over a year. Tomorrow wasn't a merger. It was a takeover, and the contract he just signed finalized under observation by one of my junior counsel while I watched via encrypted feed. "That's fantastic, Ethan," I said coolly. "I'm sure tomorrow will be illuminating." He raised his glass to legacy. Some of us are just built for it. Our uncle clapped him on the back like he'd unlocked immortality. Now that's leadership. The future of the family. My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. Final list of Brighton Systems executives confirmed for interviews. Ethan is first. Eating clock aiming sharp. Excuse me, I said, rising smoothly from the table, my mother sighed without looking up from her tea. Still answering support calls at this hour. You think I'm beneath you, Mom, but you'll see my powers soon, I thought, my heart racing with purpose. I offered a tight smile and stepped out into the quiet hallway of the Savannah Coastal Club, where our family banquet had been held each fall for over 2 decades. The polished black stone beneath my heels echoed softly as I reread the message. Everything was in place. And tomorrow morning, Ethan, the golden boy of our family, would walk into a job interview. With me. The executive boardroom at top Innovatech Tower had been prepared overnight, security briefed, presentation files synced, contracts waiting in black leather folders embossed with Innovatech's Falcon logo. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my 50th floor office, watching the lights of Savannah shimmer below like a circuit board. The scent of incense still clung to me from the restaurant. I could still hear Ethan's voice from hours earlier, brash, proud, unaware he'd be walking straight into an executive performance review chaired by me. I glanced at the clock. 6:42 a.m. Just over an hour to go. Earlier that evening, I had returned to the dining table just in time for Ethan's speech. Success, he declared, raising his bourbon glass, is about knowing when to dominate. Not everyone has that instinct. You're about to learn I've mastered that instinct, Ethan, I said, my voice low but pointed. You're absolutely right, I said softly. Tomorrow should be very revealing, he smirked, still interested in that junior analyst role.
Honey, there's a cubicle with your name on it.
Something like that, I said, lifting my tea to new beginnings. Driving home, I let their voices fade behind me, replaced with quiet focus. The apartment they thought was a studio, it was the penthouse at Riverfront Residences overlooking downtown Savannah. The BMW in the garage, paid for the day I finalized our acquisition stake in Brighton Systems. As I reviewed the files that night, I nearly laughed. What began with a borrowed laptop in a shared cafe had become the empire they were walking into. Innovatech now operated across 3 continents, and today it would quietly absorb the very company that made Ethan feel untouchable. That morning, I stepped into my private elevator, sliding the ingrained black key card into place. The digital panel glowed softly. 48.9, 50 top-floor executive boardroom. In the mirrored walls, I adjusted the collar of my ash-gray Soho Atelier blazer. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about standing in the full weight of my own power. And when Ethan sat across from me with his resume and overconfidence, I'd offer him exactly what he never offered me. A chance. If he was worth the risk. I stood at the window of my penthouse office in Innovate House, Savannah. Savannah's skyline, awash in pale morning gold. Below the city pulsed with quiet energy. Reflected back at me was no longer the girl they doubted, but a woman who owned the future they never saw coming. Good morning, Miss Foster, said my assistant Lila as I stepped out of the elevator. The Brighton Systems executives are in the main boardroom. Your cousin arrived early 20 minutes ago. Of course he had. Ethan always had to be first. Always needed the upper hand. How many times has he mentioned his promotion? I asked. Lila glanced down at her tablet, trying not to laugh. 12 times so far, and 5 references to the Brighton Kyosa integration. I smirked slightly, smoothing my sleeve. And our protocols. Board secured, surveillance and clean, contracts prepped, no leaks. Perfect, I said, taking one last breath. Let's begin. The Innovatech boardroom wasn't just functional. It was symbolic. Clean lines, subtle dominance, every chair set with exacting purpose. It was a room built to redefine power. As we approached, Ethan's voice echoed from within. Once the merger is finalized, I expect to oversee all Southern accounts. I wouldn't be surprised if Innovatech offers me a board seat. I pushed the door open with calm precision, and the room went silent. Silence dropped like a curtain. Ethan, midway through what could only have been another self-glorifying monologue, turned toward the doorway. His confident smirk faltered as confusion crept into his expression. Emily, he blinked. What? What are you doing here? I didn't pause. I walked in with quiet precision, placed my leather briefcase at the head of the table, and met the gaze of every stunned executive seated around the Innovatic boardroom. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay. Lila began distributing the acquisition packets to each person in the room, her movements calm and efficient. There's some mistake, Ethan snapped, tension rising in his voice. This is a confidential meeting. We're here to speak with Innovatech's CEO about the merger. I opened my folder, deliberately. That's correct. I'm Emily Foster, founder and CEO of Innovatech. You thought you were untouchable, Ethan, but I've been pulling the strings all along, I said, my voice steady and commanding. I let the words settle, and the silence that followed. It was delicious. Now then, Ethan, about that merger. Let's see how you handle the truth, cousin, I thought. My eyes locked on his stunned face. If you've been following my journey from whispered judgment to undeniable power, don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next isn't just a reveal, it's a reckoning. Around the table, the Brighton Systems leadership began flipping through their folders, expressions shifting from confusion to stunned clarity. Just yesterday, I was a name they barely acknowledged, an afterthought. Today, I was their new reality. This is absurd, Ethan said stiffly, color draining from his face. You've been freelancing from a shared office. The freelancer story, I said with quiet composure, was a smokescreen, just like the studio apartment you mocked, which happens to sit at Top Riverfront Tower, a building fully owned by Innovatech. Ethan stared like he was seeing me for the first time. In truth, he was. Real success, I continued, stepping beside the digital monitor, doesn't always show itself at family dinners. Sometimes it's quietly building a kingdom while everyone else is too busy performing. Click. The screen lit up with a sleek presentation. 18 months of shell acquisitions, proxy investments, and stealth takeovers. This isn't a merger, it's an acquisition. Innovatech now owns 51% of Brighton Systems, executed through silent acquisitions finalized over the past fiscal year. And for once, Ethan had no comeback. Ethan's expression twisted. Shock curdled into something sharper. You let me brag all night while you were planning this behind my back. You humiliated me, Emily, and kept it hidden, he spat, his voice trembling with betrayal. While I listened to you take credit for your assistant's work, while you coasted on borrowed ideas, inflated metrics, and networking dinners, I said, my voice steady, never raised. You built your ego on lies, Ethan, while I built an empire on truth, I added, my words cutting deep. Around the room, several executives shifted uncomfortably. Some had suspected. A few had even tried to speak up over the past year, but no one dared challenge Ethan. Not until now. As of 8 o'clock IA today, Brighton Systems is officially an innovative subsidiary. Effective immediately, the executive leadership structure is under review. Ethan shot to his feet, his chair screeching back across the polished floor. You can't do this. I'm regional director. Your position, I said calmly, is being dissolved, along with several others identified as non-performing. However, I turned to the remaining executives. The majority of operations staff will be retained. Innovatech rewards results, not resumes padded with jargon. What followed was a blur of signatures, acknowledgments, and stunned departures. Executives filed out in silence, some still unable to look me in the eye. Eventually, only Ethan remained. He stood near the panoramic window, Savannah sprawling beneath us like circuitry. His voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell me? I collected the final documents, placing them neatly into my briefcase. Would you have listened? You never saw me as an equal, Ethan, so why would I share my triumph with you? I asked, my tone piercingly calm. He turned toward me, face pale and eyes glassy. Every Christmas dinner, every time you said you were figuring things out, you were building this. I met his gaze. Yes, while you were performing success, I was busy earning it. You offered me an entry-level analyst role. I continued my tone, even as if that was a favor. You thought I'd be lucky to serve under you. Click, I closed my briefcase. Consider this a lesson in humility. Power doesn't need a spotlight to grow, it just needs focus. He opened his mouth, but my phone buzzed before he could speak. I didn't need to check. Mom and Dad lit up the screen like clockwork. I imagined his phone was ringing too. Now that security had returned everyone's devices, the truth was out and Savannah was wide awake. I answered on speaker. Hello, Emily. My mother's voice was sharp, brittle, almost panicked. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been hiding this from us all these years. I never hid anything, I said calmly, adjusting the cuff of my blazer. You just never asked the right questions. You were too focused on applauding Ethan to notice what I was quietly building. You chose him over me, Mom, and now you face the consequences, I said, my voice steady but laced with years of hurt. But we tried to help, she insisted. We offered to introduce you to people to help you find a stable job. I was busy building a multinational tech firm, I said simply. A rare smile touched my lips, though I admit, hearing Ethan offer me an entry-level role at a company I was about to acquire, that was more satisfying than I expected. Silence, then my father's voice, deeper, slower, filtered in. Why didn't you ever tell us? You never cared enough to ask, Dad, I said, my words heavy with truth. I glanced at Ethan, still standing by the window like someone watching the floor vanish beneath his feet. Then I looked back at the phone. Because I needed this to be mine, I said, not for your validation, not to prove anything, just for me. I ended the call. At the doorway, I paused. Oh, and Ethan, about that analyst job you mentioned, you might want to update your CV. Applications open next week. You'll answer to me now, Ethan, or you'll be left behind, I said, my voice a final cutting note. The next family gathering. Very different. No more whispered comments about my unfocused path. No more cousins ignoring me for corporate success stories. Suddenly, I was the story. The one they leaned toward. The one they now quoted. Ethan didn't attend. Rumor was he'd accepted a quieter role at a mid-tier consulting firm. Not embarrassed. They still fumbled when others asked about me. Sometimes they spoke proudly, other times they hesitated, as if still reconciling who I had become with who they believed I was. And me? I'd moved into Innovate's new regional HQ, my name etched in glass across the top floor. Some nights when I stayed late, I'd catch a glimpse of my old apartment still hidden between rooftops in downtown Savannah, a reminder of where I started and why I never looked back. Success isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one they overlooked until it was far too late. And the greatest shift, it wasn't in how they saw me, it was in how I saw myself. Because the best revenge, it's not revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't and not needing their applause to feel complete. Thank you for listening to a story I never thought I'd have the courage to share. If it resonated with you, I truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or virtue vision was too unrealistic, too quiet, or too different to matter? I read every word. Because even after building a tech empire and taking back a seat they never thought I deserved, connection still matters. And if there's one piece of advice I'd leave you with, it's this. You don't owe anyone your story until you're ready to tell it. You don't need to explain your ambition to people who only understand attention, not growth. Build quietly, move smart, rise intentionally, and when it's time to step forward, you won't need to raise your voice. Your work will do that for you. If Emily's story reminded you of your own strength, I hope you'll subscribe, because I have more stories to share. Stories that might help you reclaim your own voice, your own pace, your own power. And remember this, just because they can't see your worth yet, doesn't mean you're not already becoming something extraordinary. And one day soon,